Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Talk About the Pots Life, your go-to podcast for all things pots. Whether you're living with pots or supporting someone who is, this is the place for you.
Welcome back, everyone, to this episode of Let's Talk About the Pots Life.
This episode is extra special because we have our first Pots Life graduate. We have Rachael joining us. She finished up, about a month ago?
Yeah, a little over a month ago in October.
Yeah, a little over a month ago. She is a graduate. I wish you could take a picture, send in a picture of what you look like day one compared to what you look like on graduation day, because I think you're a whole different person.
That's for sure.
It's crazy and it's hard and overwhelming. I think that first day, or maybe even when you heard about us, is this for real? Will this actually help? And Rachael will tell you about her story because she's a little bit different in terms of she tried something prior to coming here and the bumpiness she had with that. So I think what we'll let her do is share a little more about herself and then talk a little bit about what life looked like prior to POTS.
Thanks, Kelsey. So I was diagnosed with POTS in March of 2023. Before that, I was a very independent, full of life person. I was going to the gym 6 to 7 days a week. I was working full time, 40 to 50 hours a week. I'm an occupational therapist in a trauma hospital. So my days were 8 to 10 hours, 40 to 50 hours a week without issues. Sure, we all get tired. We're working long days, but I was living a full life. I was seeing my friends. I was going to concerts and going out to dinner and living my life without issues whatsoever. And then I got COVID in March of 2023, and my entire life changed. I had never had COVID, even though I had worked with patients day in and day out with it. But unfortunately, I got very sick and I was in and out of the hospital for probably close to 3 weeks. I couldn't work. And as I started getting what I thought was quote unquote better from COVID, something still wasn't right. I was having really crazy heart rate episodes. I'd walk from my bed to my bathroom, which is not even 10 feet, and my heart rate would go to 190. And I was like, this can't just be from COVID.
Right.
And my blood pressure was sky high, and then it would plummet. I was sleeping at least 16 to 18 hours a day. I had no energy. And by the time the doctors were like, okay, you can go back to work, I'm like, what? How am I supposed to work? So the first couple of days, because at that point I had no idea I had POTS, excuse me. So I was like, okay, what do I do? And they're like, just try to go to work, take your time. Like everyone that comes back from COVID, like you did, like it takes some time. And I was like, okay, not a problem. Well, as I started going back to work, I was getting lightheaded. I wasn't passing out, but I was getting lightheaded enough that I had to hurry up and sit before I fell. And then I was having crazy heart rate episodes at work. And I was like, something just isn't right.
I think people should know there are different types of therapists in a hospital, but Rachael worked on a floor that people were very ill when they come, and it's an inpatient rehab floor. So she has heavy lifts and she's working around a ton of medical lines and IVs, and it's not just she can go in and do her job and get out. She has a lot of people and their safety in her hands. So this was even more scary. I know you had said at the time that how can I safely do my job with all these crazy symptoms that appeared?
Absolutely. And that was one of my biggest concerns because, like you said, I was lifting patients that had various diagnoses. And so I had to make sure that I was stable and safe enough to get patients up and moving and do things, which as an occupational therapist, I'm showering people, which is a good 45 minutes in a hot room. And I'm getting down on the floor and I'm helping them get dressed and get washed. And then I'm trying to stand. And those very quick movements that we're not supposed to make with POTS, I had to make a lot. And as me thinking, oh, this is just COVID, post COVID stuff, here it wasn't. So I came into seeing my primary care doctor, and he was like, I'll just send you to a cardiologist. I don't know what's wrong. And I'm like, something's wrong.
Something's not right.
I'm sitting here thinking, I'm not a doctor, but I've been in the medical field 14 years. I know something's wrong. And I know we know our own bodies. So I was thankful enough to find an amazing cardiology team. And the very first day I walked in that office, she said, okay, we're going to get your full past medical history. We're going to go through everything and we're going to start running tests. And thankfully to those doctors, they immediately told me you have this thing called postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. So that kind of started the journey then of, okay, what do I do now? Like I had never even treated a POTS patient as an OT. So I was like, I don't even, what is this? Am I going to die? What's going to happen now? And it's really scary at first because you're like, is this a heart problem or is this a neuro
Right.
problem? So then I started panicking of what happens
Of
next.
course.
Which didn't make POTS symptoms any better,
No,
but
it
you
did not.
don't know any better.
Absolutely.
Rachel has a great cardiologist that is on top of things and I think listens to her and listens to all patients, which is very hard to find. So that's awesome that she was able to find somebody like that. But it is still the unknown that, okay, I have this, but I'm young and my life is turned upside down. So now what? And after you saw her, then walk us through what happened next.
So because I am a therapist, I thought, okay, therapy has to be good. Moving has to be good. So I immediately was like, okay, can I see a therapist? And she goes, yeah, absolutely. I'll set you up with an OT and a PT. And she said, and we'll go from there. At the time, I was seeing just what we consider a standard PT and an OT. They were not neuro based, they were not POTS based or anything of that nature. They were just your standard therapist. They were wonderful therapists. I owe a lot because they really did get me back to it, doing a lot on my kind of like day to day life. However, they weren't familiar with POTS patients. So a lot of my kind of carryover with what I was trying to work on was more so post COVID and not POTS. So a lot of the things I was doing was general strengthening, lots of endurance and cardio, which unfortunately ended up putting me back a little bit because they thought they were just trying to get my endurance up because I had had COVID. But the problem was I finally completed about 3 months of PT and then was doing okay, thinking, okay, I'm doing all right. This is pretty good. Like I was walking on a treadmill then, I was lifting weights. I had even gone back to the gym. And then come August, September, I had a huge flare and immediately got set back to 0. And then I was like, now what? Like, how do I fix this now? So then, unfortunately, I had to start all over again.
That's the shame of it. And Britt and I talk that you don't know till even
Mhm,
being a PT, you being an OT ourselves, you don't realize the delicacy of a POTS
mhm,
patient and
mhm,
not pushing them that far. So I think that's what's overwhelming too, because they're great PTs and OTs. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just
mhm.
you don't know. So they're doing things that push you too hard or too fast or just walking on a treadmill. That sounds great to most, but if your blood isn't flowing the right way, it's more or less band-aiding, or I say as if there's a bunch of holes in the bucket, like you might have plugged a few holes, but you're barely holding that water in. It's like you said, a few months and then here comes a giant flare and it wasn't enough to withstand an illness or a flare or whatever it might be, the stress for people, and then it just tips things the other way.
Absolutely. Because at that point, then I had to think, okay, what do I do next? Because I had gone through all the therapists and all the therapies. And so then I was like, okay, I don't know. I don't even know how to help myself at this point. I'm like, what should I be eating? How much am I not drinking enough water? And then you start spiraling a little bit on, am I not helping myself? What should I be doing? Who should I be going to? And then thankfully, that's at that point then where I found you and my entire life changed for the better.
It is, and it's we talk about that fragile period, right? We're all desperate. There's a lot on there. Social media has how many platforms, right? TikTok, Instagram. You
Oh,
can
yeah.
find almost anything you're looking for, but it's also hard to know, is this legit? Is this going to help? Is this gimmicky or slimy, or you're cautious because especially for you, you'd already been through something. So
Mhm,
even more so, it had to be a little nerve-wracking to be like, okay, I'm
mhm.
going to now try this.
Scary part is just trying to figure that out.
When we went through your story, Kelsey, your diagnosis took years to really come to life about what it was with all your different symptoms. And it sounded like your story was a little bit different, Rachel, in that your doctor was able to say, yeah, let's get you to a cardiologist. So what were those things that first symptoms that you had that you told your normal doctor that got you to see that cardiologist so that you got your diagnosis?
So a lot of my symptoms that I had initially were what I thought were more post-COVID things, but now that I knew that I had a diagnosis, I then started thinking, oh, maybe these are not necessarily COVID things. But my initial symptoms when I went to my primary care physician was significant tachycardia. So I would stand just from the edge of my bed or my chair at work, and my heart rate would go to 160, 170. Sometimes it would even get close to 200 and I would panic.
Ooh.
I was pretty short of breath pretty consistently, but again, it was hard to differentiate between what was post-COVID and now POTS.
Mhm.
And then a lot of my early symptoms were also surrounding a lot of GI issues and a lot of headaches and like severe nausea. And I have a history of migraines, so I didn't really think necessarily all of this
Right.
being quote unquote POTS. I was like, oh, these are just things that are happening to me. But the tachycardia and the shortness of breath were my two big concerning things where I was like, this is not normal.
I think that's a good point because even you say like the history of migraines, like there are things, patterns that we can put together as you hear different patient stories, or maybe you can put patterns together for yourself that it's not uncommon for us to meet somebody that is now diagnosed with POTS with a long history of migraines for sure.
Absolutely.
So once you got your POTS diagnosis and you finally found Kelsey, do you
Mhm.
want to talk a little bit more about just your first initial experience with working with Kelsey compared to your previous OTPT that wasn't specializing in POTS?
Sure. So when I had first met Kelsey and set everything up, I could already tell that she was going to look obviously very holistically at me as a patient or client. However, she was very educated and researched in POTS. And I knew that she had POTS. So I'm like, she's going to automatically know what I'm going through to begin with.
Mm.
But when you are already a therapist, you meet another therapist who's trying to understand your diagnosis and help you, it's a very different realization of like, I finally found help. And
Right.
it really helped me along my way to understand that someone finally got it.
That's a big part, right? Even me being on the patient side, when I met with the physician that finally got it, just somebody that can make you feel less crazy or validate all the feelings that you're feeling.
Absolutely. And so when I started that initial therapy with the other therapists from OT and PT, it's not that they didn't listen. It's not that they weren't taking care of me as a patient or a client, but I could tell that what they were approaching was that cookie cutter approach of we're going to work on the endurance, we're going to work on your strength, and this is how we're going to approach it, and we're going to progress you as unique as you can. But Kelsey's program was so different. And so when I saw Kelsey, everything was about first, let's learn about Rachel. Like, who is Rachel? And what are your goals? Right after I met her, I had gotten engaged. And so I was like, how am I going to plan a wedding? I can't even
Right.
stand up to brush my teeth. Like, how am I going to
You weren't
stand at an
even,
altar?
you were, and you weren't driving.
No, I wasn't
That
driving.
was limited.
I was having to get rides to and from work. And the fact I couldn't even attempt to do things outside of just my day to day things, that was energy expending enough. The fact that I was even attempting to go to work, that was a goal. If I made it there, great. If I made it to therapy, great. If I couldn't do anything else, that kind of just was the nature of life for a long time.
And we've talked about this a couple times with different episodes about advocating for yourself and finding the right people in your corner, and no discredit to the PT and OT that you worked with. If
Hmm.
you don't have that specialty, and that's the same thing with any healthcare profession, you specialize in what you know, even with nutrition. Some folks specialize in eating disorders, some folks don't touch that. So you know
Hmm.
what your scope is. And so I think finding someone, a PT that not only has POTS, but has a program designed for POTS really makes a difference in that advocacy that you can see and finding yourself.
Absolutely. And especially since this program that Kelsey has isn't just about the fact that we're going to exercise. This was a lot of different things. How do you approach your diet? How do you approach your water intake? when you do have this random symptom, like you're not crazy. Unfortunately, POTS has a myriad of symptoms. So it's nice just to be able to have that support and that extra person just to be like, hey, like, I get it. You're going through something and it's really scary, but you have this community around you and we're here to help you.
It is. That community support, I think, is the biggest extra piece we could add outside of the exercise because it does feel lonely to be diagnosed with something like this and at times hopeless. And we speak often about what you can find on the internet, and sometimes that'll just crush you even further. So, just having the community support and a sounding board and a normal person to say, yes, it does stink and I get it, but I promise it can get better. So, we try to be transparent and authentic that it does stink and we know that, but we can help you through it. Now, when you started the program and I said, okay, we're going to do 12 months and we're going to work month to month and you're going to get new exercises, was that overwhelming or what were your beginning initial thoughts?
I think because I am a therapist, I know how much it can really truly involve in the long term, not the short term. So I looked at it as, okay, this is not only like long-term commitment now, but this is a long-term commitment forever. This
Yes.
isn't just exercise here for the next year for me and then you're going to be cured. This really had to change your mindset on you're either going to get better and you're going to improve or you're not. And so I like really had to take a minute and be like, okay, I know I can do this. But I wasn't overwhelmed by any means at the beginning because I knew that I was very comfortable with you. So it made me feel a lot easier to come in there and be like, okay, I can do this. It's going to not be easy. It's going to be hard, but I want to get better. I want my life back. So you just have to have
Right.
that mindset initially.
It is, and we're also desperate. So it's sometimes hard to have that mindset, but it's awesome when people do and they're ready to get started. My saying is you got to give it 1 to 2 months. And at 3 months, I feel like people start to stack little wins. So maybe you don't always notice, but family members or friends might notice, or even little things, right? They're the little wins we stack. And then
Mhm.
come month 5, 6, I feel like we really get to compound those wins and they become bigger. And then by the end, I would say I've been saying around 70 to 80, maybe 85% of your life back of where you were. And then now, 4 years out, obviously, I'm at a way different spot. But do you feel like that's realistic? And that was your experience of seeing wins along the way as you move through the 12 months?
Absolutely. A lot of it too was making sure you had that accountability and responsibility to yourself, but also having that accountability from the program. You did the exercises. That's one thing I loved about being able to put my exercises into an app and making sure I checked them off every day and said, yes, I did these. And that was an
That's
accomplishment.
the type A personalities.
Yes, it is. But it was so rewarding to know, even like you were saying, after 3 months, I was like, oh, okay, like I'm being able to exercise and do more. And it wasn't just laying flat in a bed doing things. Like I was starting to do things sitting and standing. And I was like, okay, we're starting to move a little bit more to what I'm used to. I was going to the gym 6 to 7 days a week and I was lifting enough to be able to lift my patients at work. And then I started back in the program where I was laying down doing quad sets. And I was like, how is this going to help? But it did.
It's shocking at first. I tell people all the time, just trust the process. Just trust me.
So yes, it definitely, as the program goes, you definitely start seeing changes. And of course, there's a lot of factors. It's not just the exercise, but as long as you're doing everything that you can for the body that you have and what you need to do for yourself, it really absolutely made a difference.
And we say too that POTS is not, we're not curing it. We have no magic wand. And although we do wish we did, it is a,
I'm looking for it.
it is a, it's a true lifestyle change, right? And so, like you said, you were an active person before you had COVID and the diagnosis of POTS. You were going to the gym. Your job was taxing on lifting patients. And Kelsey always says you get back a percentage, but how do you feel now after a year of the program compared to where you were prior to diagnosis?
So compared to before I was diagnosed, I'm probably close to 85, 90% there now. I definitely notice depending on the activities I do. Yes, I use my strategies, but if I stand for too long in one spot, if I don't drink enough water, if I eat the wrong things, I don't necessarily have a flare, but I definitely have more symptoms throughout that day. But beforehand, obviously, I had not one symptom. So looking at it now, it's much more the Rachel that I know now compared to the Rachel that I knew from a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now. Crazy to think about. It's almost been 2 years, but when you spend a year in the program, you really do see that change. So it's nice to start seeing the Rachel I knew from almost 2 years ago now, knowing I can do more, but I just have to modify things a little bit, and that's okay.
It's so true when you say, "Oh my gosh, it's hard to believe it was 2 years," because I think that's a normal statement because when you're living in that POTS body day to day, especially in the beginning, it feels like a lifetime or eternity, and then as you start to feel better, just like she said, it's what you expect. People I was on a call the other day, and she said, "What's your cure? Or do you guarantee a cure?" And I'm like, "No, that's not I don't think that's true to say that. I don't think that's a fair statement, right? Just exactly
Mhm.
what Rachel said. At the end of the year, it is still a lifelong change, and you have to continue to make adjustments and continue to do the right exercise for your body to make sure you keep those symptoms at bay. Unfortunately, we hear stories of people that maybe did a program in the past and then stopped. And then within a few months, honestly, you start sliding backwards, which is overwhelming because it's a good motivator, but it's also overwhelming at times that you have to do this for life. But to Rachel's point, you're still going to see symptoms. They're not, like she said, total flares, and she still has to make adjustments. But as she continues, even in this next year, she'll continue to see that she'll need less of her strategies because her body just becomes stronger and stronger.
If you can think back to early on diagnosis, what is something you're doing today that you were like, yeah, I'm never going to do that again?
As far as like my day to day activities,
Sure. Yeah.
so when I was first diagnosed, obviously, I've told Kelsey this numerous times that like I couldn't even stand to brush my teeth. I couldn't stand to get dressed. Forget putting makeup on and even caring what I look like most days. But being able to do even just the basics when I first got diagnosed were a chore. I was like, oh my God, I don't think I can do this today. I'm like, okay, Rachel, you got to get up. You got to at least wash your face and brush your teeth and change your clothes. Where now I just get up and just do it. I don't even think twice about it now. It's just, oh, okay, this is just normal life now. No big deal. But the other thing too is I actually recently had COVID within the past 2 weeks. And
Oh,
if
geez.
I didn't have the program I had from Kelsey, when I first got diagnosed with COVID last time, I was sick for over a month, like just with COVID. I was sick for 5 days just now, and I went back to work perfectly fine. You would never even know I had COVID. So, like, just that's a huge difference too, in like how I've managed to deal with illness and just those things that creep up on you in life. I even probably right after I was diagnosed with POTS, that didn't look the same at all. But it is really interesting and really gratifying too to see that all the work you do put in really does make a difference, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. But I did think it was like an epiphany moment after I had COVID this time of, wow, I did not recover this well last time. And I was what I considered healthy. So
Yeah. I think that's a testament to you and your dedication. It's a lot to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I know we all have in our head, okay, I have no other option, but following through on that is difficult and life happens and illnesses and work. And I think the listeners should know when you started, we had to use a lot of sick days and FMLA, and she is kicking butt and working a normal schedule and long hours and not having to take those days. And like she said, having COVID again, we're going to have life stressors. We're going to have illness. She's planning a wedding. You're going to have these bumps along the way, but her body is much stronger and able to withstand all of these bumps and handle them much better than she was 2 years ago.
thanks, Kels.
That made me think back, Kelsey, too. Excuse me, one of your wins that we talked about, where you said I didn't even think about it, but I was able to pull my Christmas tree out of my attic without falling over. And to think back that, yeah, you weren't doing that a couple years ago, brushing your teeth. It's like these little things that you thought, oh, yeah, this seems like normal. Someone should be able to do this. But when you hit that milestone, like a year, 2, 3 years down the road, it's like, oh, yeah, this is great.
And I think it makes you remember, Rach, you would probably agree that you're like, oh my gosh, you're right. I couldn't do that. Or my husband will say something. I forget what we were talking about the other day. Oh, literally, when I would get up in the middle of the night and I couldn't walk to the bathroom because my heart rate would go crazy. So I would crawl. He's like, do you remember when you were crawling to the bathroom? I'm like, you're right. I was. Oh my gosh. You just do and you live in that body. But when you can sit on this other side, which seems unreachable when you're sick and just diagnosed, but isn't it crazy what you look back and be like, oh my gosh, I just did that because I had to.
We were even talking about it the other day because Thanksgiving just passed. And last year during Thanksgiving, I remember I laid on the floor and did my exercises watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. And then I laid on the couch almost the entire day because I was so symptomatic and not feeling well. And this year for Thanksgiving, I cooked the entire Thanksgiving dinner. And
Oh
I
my
couldn't even
gosh.
fathom that last year. There's no way I could have even attempted that last year. And this year, I stood in the kitchen with my mom and we made our entire Thanksgiving dinner. And I never had to sit down once.
I wouldn't be doing that, pots or no pots, making a Thanksgiving dinner. So the fact that you even attempted, phenomenal.
It's just so cool because this is the stuff I want people to hear. This is why we started the Pots Life. This is why we started the podcast. I just hope hearing that should bring hope to others that you can be down and out, but look where it can take you. It's pretty amazing. If you had one piece of advice to give someone starting or Rachel starting day one, now that you're where you are today, what would you tell them?
I think the biggest, at least number one advice that I would tell anybody is don't lose hope. Because I think at the beginning, I definitely hit a lot of very dark places and a lot of rock bottoms. And just remember, if you seek out the help, keep the faith and keep that hope, you will get better. Yes, we will always have our kind of challenging days and things can happen. But if you keep that hope, that really helped me to be able to keep going and then have the community around me to keep that village because you need the village. But
You need
that
that
was like
village.
my biggest thing.
I'm so lucky that we got to meet and work with Rachel and just see her blossom to where she is today. It took a lot of hard work, but she was in it and kept going, and she's seeing the benefits of that now. So we just hope by sharing her story and future stories to come that you can relate. And every story is going to look a little bit different. My diagnosis didn't come after COVID. Rachel's did. You'll hear from others that we have a whole plethora of different reasons POTS appeared. So we just hope that by sharing these stories, you can relate and find hope along the way to keep going and keep pushing.
And Rachel, if you could leave us with one last word on what your life looks like now with pots, what would it be?
So my life is wonderful. I'm able to go back to living my day-to-day life with a smile on my face. I go to work every day and I get to work with the patients that I enjoy working with, and I'm able to enjoy seeing my friends and my family, and I'm not stuck in my house every day anymore. And it's really nice to know that there's something outside of my room and I can live my life again. And that's like the biggest thing is the life I had a year and a half, almost 2 years ago is very different. But even though it's different, I don't want to say it's necessarily better, but it's different in a good way. And I'm just thankful for everything that's come along the way to teach me to what I have to do to be able to live the life that I want to be able to live.
I love it. We love it. I love that we got to share her story and bring you just a different perspective of somebody who has walked through the entire program. If you are interested, a little reminder is you can go to our website, thepotslife.com, click sign up now, and it'll walk you through it. Once you activate your account, the little Pots Life app icon will appear on your screen. If you're still not sure, you can always on that website also schedule a call with me so we can go over things further to make sure it's a right fit for you. We are so thankful that we had Rachael today. So if you loved listening to the podcast, we'd love to have you subscribe, share with others, and then continue to join us every week.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in today. And thank you, Rachael, for joining us. We love to hear your story.
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you next episode.